In a world of super fast supercars, practical family cars, and god-awful SUVs, there are very few budget-friendly alternatives that petrolheads like you and I can enjoy. A class that has dominated this category for decades have been hot hatches. These spicy commuters are always fun and are always in demand, so it's hard to find a wallet-friendly one. Thankfully, for those here who have saved up some cash for a new car, whether you have 5 grand to spend or 30 grand, this video is for you. So it's best that you don't go anywhere for the top 10 best hot hatches at any budget. Hey there, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's only the start of the video and the actual video itself hasn't even started yet, so I'll keep this short and sweet. I would really like it if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. And I also recommend that you hit that bell icon so you are notified about any new videos. But ultimately, to praise the algorithm, I would really like it if you liked the video as well. Anyway, let's get back to the show. Starting out with the 5,000 or less category, we have the Skoda Fabia VRS Mark 1. The Skoda Fabia VRS Mark 1 took a completely different approach to the usual hot hatch recipe. Rather than use a feisty petrol engine, Skoda decided to use the 1.9 litre TDI engine found in the usual Volkswagen parts bin. This car produced 130 brake horsepower, which doesn't seem like a lot. However, the PD 1.9 TDI engine is probably one of the most tunable engines of all time, with certain VRSs producing 2, 3, even 4 or 500 horsepower. However, if you're not into that, the Fabia VRS is a relatively decent car to drive, despite the heavy engine, and they can deliver well over 50 mpg at times, which is really impressive, even compared to modern standards. Best of all, these cars are quite old, so they can be had for about 3 grand. Coming up next, we have the Corsa VXR. Probably one of the best cars ruined by its stereotype. The Vauxhall Corsa VXR or Opel Corsa OPC is a really powerful and really quick car. With a 1.6 litre turbocharged engine producing 200 brake horsepower, this car was producing Mark 7 Fiesta ST numbers nearly 10 years before that car even existed. Let down by the McDonald's crew picking up 15-year-old stereotype, the Corsa VXR is a seriously competitive and interesting car. It's relatively cheap to run and it still has held up very well in terms of looks for its age, and it's plenty perfect to be tuned, so it can be made even faster if you wanted to. Although finding one for 5 grand is difficult, it's not impossible. Just be sure to have some spare cash aside in case something goes wrong. Now we move on to our second section, which is the 10 grand or less section, and we kick this off with the Volkswagen Lupo GTI. The VW Lupo GTI is probably one of the most overslept hatches of all time. Since its day, it's been completely forgotten about. However, it has suddenly turned into quite an iconic hot hatch. It's light as a feather and packing quite a punch from its 1.6 litre engine. They produce around 125 brake horsepower. Now, you may not think that that's a lot, but remember this, the car weighs about 1,000 kilos. So the car was incredibly brisk, and best of all, it handled like an absolute dream, making it one of the best handling hatchbacks of its day, if not of all time. People are beginning to notice these cars, so they are beginning to go up in price. And to make things a little more challenging, they are quite rare, with the UK only getting 1,000 or so. However, a lot of Japanese imported ones have seemed to appear, so you can see them on the usual classifieds for about 8 grand. But do act fast because before you know it, it'll be too late. Secondly, we have the Audi S3 Mark II. The Audi S3 was revealed back in 2006, and it was basically the Golf R before the Golf R was the Golf R. Anyway, the S3 used a 2 litre turbocharged engine, which is the same EA 888 engine that is being used today. However, it's a very earlier version of that. This particular type of EA 888 is the type of engine you would have found in a Mark V GTI, except it produces 60 more brake horsepower, bringing the total power output to 260 brake horsepower. And being an Audi, the S3 has excellent build quality, and it really looks good, inside and out. And to be honest, as it's a Volkswagen Audi Group product, it can be easily tuned, and not to mention the S3 also has 4-wheel drive, so it's good all year round, meaning that you don't need a second car to drive around when the winter comes. This car will perform extremely well everywhere. The S3 is rare, but it's not too rare, and they still do appear on the local classifieds for about 10 grand. Now we move on to our third section. This is the 15,000 or less category, and we kick this off with the Vauxhall Astro VXR. The Vauxhall Astro VXR, also known as the Opel Astra OPC, was a continuation from the previous Astra VXR/OPC, but this time it's based on the Astra J platform. The previous VXR/OPC had a reputation of being a bit of a mad one, a car which is famous for having ferocious power and ferocious torque steer. But unlike the previous generation, this Astra J VXR is a lot better engineered, and it can grip and handle extremely well, even with the additional power. The Astra VXR produces 276 brake horsepower, and it will do 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds. This is actually our most modern car on this list so far, as this car went into production in 2012 all the way to the end of 2016. With this in mind, obviously you get a lot more safer cars as well, and you do get a lot of fancier tech, such as sports modes, which can adjust the throttle response and suspension. Since this car was released, it's basically been forgotten about, and so these cars can be had for under 15 grand. You may even pay 12 or 13 for a decent one. Following up on the Astra VXR, we have the Renault Sport Megane 250. Released back in 2010, this was one of the first Renault Sport Meganes under that new coupe sort of look that they were going with. But there were so many other models following after it, including one with 275 brake horsepower. And there was an even lighter version of it, which had perspex windows and fancy liveries and stuff like that. To be honest, I don't know a lot about these Renault Sports, but basically this one produces 250 brake horsepower, and it too will do 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds. This is particularly thanks to its light weight, as it weighs under 1400 kilograms. One thing the magazine said about this car on its release was that it was an absolute dream. The car received incredible praise, receiving 4.5 stars and 5 stars from Evo magazine and Autocar. At one stage there was a particular version of this Megane which was a lap record holder at the Nürburgring. The journalists absolutely adored this car, and many of the Renault fans seemed to like it as well. Although 10 years have passed since its release, the car is still highly praised, but very understated, with its competitors being a bit more popular and a bit more liked by the general public. And as a result, these cars are rather good value. 14 to 15 grand is what you are expected to pay for one. If you want a hot hatch that you can drive every day and take to the track, this is the one for you. Now we move on to our fourth and penultimate section, the 20 grand or less section. And the two cars I've picked here are very common hot hatches with plenty of history and pedigree. Now let's dig into the first one, which is the almighty Mark 7 Volkswagen Golf GTI. The Mark 7 Golf GTI has been considered as the peak of the GTI, continuing on from where the Mark 5 and Mark 6 left off. The power was increased from 210 brake horsepower to 220 with the performance package, and the DSG gearbox was massively improved. There's also a lot more safety equipment, so that it was cheaper to insure, and a very clever front differential. With this in mind, the fans were a little concerned the GTI could be going back to its kind of lazy roots. However, Volkswagen wanted to make the car as fun as the previous GTIs, while making it even more livable. As well as being a bit more powerful, it had a lot of different safety equipment, and that meant that you are in a lower insurance group, as I mentioned earlier on, which meant the insurance was cheaper, and best of all, the car was a lot greater to the environment because of the engine's adjustments, and so you paid less road tax. The Mark 7 Golf GTI, although a bit bland to some people, is arguably the ultimate daily. Perfect for a back road hoon, but still not too expensive to run. The GTI is still a relatively popular hot hatch, especially in a country that doesn't like cool cars. It is great to see this, however the popularity comes at a popular price, which means that 2013 to 2014 models can be as high as 18 grand. Despite this ridiculous price tag, I would seriously consider buying one myself. Up next we have a very common competitor with the Golf GTI, and that is the Mark III Ford Focus ST. The Ford Focus ST is a highly praised hot hatch, in Europe anyway. It's definitely a well respected one too, and it's definitely a bit more left field compared to the German competitors, with the previous generation of this ST even having a 2.5 litre inline 5 turbo, which sounds absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have an inline 5, but rather a 2 litre turbocharged engine producing 246 brake horsepower, which is about 25 more than the Mark 7 GTI. This car is also praised for having excellent handling and a very solid interior, and I can vouch for that as I've been in one several times. Although some of the journalists preferred the Renault, as I mentioned earlier, to being a little bit nicer to drive, the Ford Focus ST is definitely a lot more practical, plus it even came as a freaking wagon. Although the Mark III Focus ST's looks were divided, the looks were definitely improved massively in 2015 when the car had a facelift, in the generation known as the Mark 3.5. If you're really patient, you can definitely get one of these on budget. Although if you're not afraid to just go a little bit over, a 3.5 can be had for around 20 grand. But if money is an issue, you can get a Mark III for as low as 16. And now we move on to our final section, the 30 grand or less section. Definitely the rarest of the sections, but I have two similar but very strong candidates picked. And we kick this off with the Cupra Leon. When the S3 and Golf R were revealed, Seat realised they wanted to get in the game as well, and so they created the Mark III Seat Leon Cupra. Available in 270, 280, 290 and 300 brake horsepower variants, the Cupra Leon had a car for everyone. However, rather than be four-wheel drive, the Cupra was front-wheel drive. The Cupra made up for it with a very clever differential to handle the power, as well as a finely tuned chassis and suspension. As a result, you got a tiny bit of torque steer and maybe some skiddy boys on a wet day. However, your car was actually faster than a Golf R or an S3 around the track. Although you're not going to be beating them on a drag strip any day, and the small tight roads and B roads that you will realistically be driving this car on, you will definitely have a lot more fun. The Cupra has been praised for having a lot more character than its Golf and S3 counterpart. And compared to the prices of those two cars, the Cupra Leon is an absolute bargain. A 2014 model can cost about 21 grand, however later models from 2016 and 17 can be as low as 28 grand. Please keep those numbers in your head for a while, as I mentioned the following car. And finally, we have the Mark 7 Golf R. We all know about the Mark 7 Golf R. It's probably one of the best all-rounded cars that you can buy, never mind hot hatches. The Mark 7 Golf R used the same engine as the Cupra Leon I just mentioned, but it produced 300 brake horsepower. It had a four-wheel drive system. Although it was a Haldex system, which is basically like front-wheel drive assisted, the Golf R was still an absolute rocket no matter where it went and no matter the weather. 0 to 60 was done in under 5 seconds. In the straights, the Golf R was incredibly quick, and in the corners it was just as fast. Although the car was a little heavy at the same time, the incredible performance made up for it. And best of all, like the Focus ST and even the Cupra Leon I just mentioned, the Golf R can be had as an estate. Since this car was released, Volkswagen had some very good lease deals on it, and so there is a massive cult following. And like the GTI I just mentioned, this cult following has resulted in a very cult following price tag. 2014 models can set you back about 26 grand, and if you don't want an early model and you want a more later one, 2016 and 17s will be over budget at 35 grand, and don't get me started on the 7.5s. So yeah, compared to the Cupra like I just mentioned, they are a lot more expensive. Sure, you could argue you do get four-wheel drive, but is it 4 times the car as a result? Honestly, I don't think it is, and it's not worth the extra money for me personally. However, what do you guys think in the comments? Do you agree with me, or do you think I'm a moron? So that concludes my video. I hope you guys all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you guys all very, very soon.